Hello audience, Mr. Z here. Alexander the Great was without doubt perhaps one of history's greatest military leaders. A man who at the young age of 20 ascended to the throne of the Macedon kingdom and would go on to establish one of the ancient world's largest empires until his death at the age of 32. Alexander's actions were predominantly inspired by his father's goals of a pan-Hellenic empire. It would be this which would lead Alexander to become Pharaoh of Egypt, King of Persia, and Lord of Asia. However, his ambitions were far greater than that, with goals of expanding deep into Arabia and Western Europe. Unfortunately for the young general, his life was cut short by his declining health in 323 BC, the cause of which is still debated to this day. To make matters worse, Alexander had no legitimate heir, with his son being far too young to rule and inconsistent claims as to whom Alexander bequeathed his empire to, some arguing that it would go to his general returning west, some claiming it would go to his bodyguard and leader of the cavalry, or perhaps just his half-brother. It was finally established that his brother and son would reign as joint kings. However, many were displeased with this resolution, soon leading to the division of Alexander's empire and the assassination of the appointed kings. Now we raise the question of, what if Alexander the Great had survived long enough to meet his full imperial ambitions? Right off the bat, we have a clear and concise idea of Alexander's goals upon his return to Macedon, as outlined in his will, first of which would be the conquest of Arabia and the remaining Mediterranean basin, which, given the size of Alexander's army and their capabilities, shouldn't be too great a feat. The only major challenge I could see them facing would be geography, but certainly not something to easily dissuade the young conqueror. With use of ports in Egypt, Alexander's army is able to mount an invasion from both the north and western coast of Arabia, soon bringing the entire region under his reign. It would be with his expansion through the Mediterranean that Alexander would have his first major brush with the Romans. They were resilient and fierce in defending their homelands, but simply weren't as far along yet to pose any significant threat. Had these skirmishes not occurred, Alexander may have very well left the Romans off alone, paying them very little mind. But because of growing hostilities as the Greeks grew closer to the Roman territory, Alexander would be forced to expand into the Italian peninsula, setting his expansion off a year or two, but giving him a solid launching off point for his real goal, the conquest of Carthage, the empire which had for the longest time been a pain in his side. And while I'm sure some may argue that the battle wouldn't be as clear-cut, looking at the size and capability of both sides, it's clear that Alexander's army would be superior. Carthage at the time wouldn't even have a real naval advantage comparing their meager fleet to Alexander's, which would have far more resources and finances to develop since the time of his death in our timeline. Once troops touched down, it's essentially game over for the Carthaginian Empire. With that, Alexander would have achieved his expansionist ambitions and would move forward to the next phase of his imperial goals, integration. Alexander knew very well that he reigned over numerous people with widely different customs, lifestyles, and cultures, and if he were to die, so would any sense of loyalty to him and unity through him. Division would surely ensue, and to prevent that, he sought out a unifying force that would keep his empire together long after he was gone. Goal was first to transplant populations from east to west and west to east, in order to transfuse and blend the cultures of every region he ruled over into one. His theory was that if he could foster unity through intercultural marriages and the combining of separate ideas into ones accepted by all, then he could create a civilization which would remain united rather than divide in the absence of the right leadership. Transition period for this would no doubt be quite bumpy, and while I could certainly see this working within some spheres, there's no doubt that it would have terrible repercussions within others, but we'll get back to that in a bit. Alexander would go on to erect massive temples within Delos, Delphi, Dium, Carthage, Rome, and all throughout his domains, each a monument to a particular Greek god as a means for him to spread the Greek culture even further. Construction would also move forward for a monumental tomb greater than that of the pyramids of Egypt for he and his father. Alexander's empire was experiencing a golden age, but darkness lay just behind closed doors. Many of those transplanted from the west to the east were missionaries of a sort, individuals who Alexander thought would be perfect for spreading the Greek culture to an area devoid of it, and the same would apply vice versa. However, as the foreign presence grew on both sides, many began questioning the direction of things, beginning to feel alienated in their own homelands and surrounded by strange and unfamiliar behaviors and languages. People would begin to worry that their ways of life weren't simply being changed in only certain intermixed regions, but no matter where they went. They would begin to fear that their home and culture was being stripped away from them, something which would only grow worse as traditions held on by different groups were substituted for amalgamations of said traditions, which in their attempts to satisfy every group, alienated every group. Prejudice would grow in the east towards westerners within their borders, whilst the same occurred in the west toward easterners. Regional groups would become more exclusive, driving a greater wedge between the districts of Alexander's empire, something which by this point he may not be able to handle. Decades have passed, and Alexander's health is failing, as is that of his empire. In attempting to end division, he only fostered it, and it seems that he will not see the outcome of his course of actions. However, he now has a line of succession, numerous sons and grandsons, each given the proper mentoring he was afforded as a boy. Perhaps his successors will be able to right his course and restore order to his empire. However, I leave that for you to decide. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.